Hi, I'm Cassidy Sparks. I'm the product manager at Kimberbell over Feature Quilts. Today we'll be going over a quilty little Christmas block, and we'll be specifically focusing on double hooping and a 5x7 hoop. So let's get started. So first off, I'm just going to cover the materials you're going to need for this product. One thing that we recommend here at Kimberbell is having a flat backed tack, as seen here. It will make the project go a lot simpler, especially with that flat back, and we'll get into why that's so important a little bit later in the tutorial. Another thing that you'll need just to finish off the product, if you're planning on using the custom buttons, is the heart button from your button pack. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load my embroidery file, and remember, these instructions for the 5x7 hooping are provided separately. If you are hooping in a 6x10, your instructions can be found in the main quilt instructions. We're going to load the first half of the block. We're going to be doing this in two halves. So we're going to do the bottom half of the block, and then we will have to rehoop and do the top half of the block. The bottom half is going to cover our cute little stamp design, and this is honestly one of my favorite blocks. It just has so much color to it, and it ties in all of the colors that you'll be using for Quilty Little Christmas. All of the pinks, greens, reds. It's just a beautiful block. So just for visibility on the camera, I'm going to be using a green thread. My next thread that I use is going to be a pink color, but we just want to make sure it's extra clear and visible, and I'll change that out when we get to that step. But as you're watching the instructions, there's a lot of neutral color instructions, and there's also visible color instructions. So I'll point those out as we go, but just be paying close attention to your thread instructions. Now there's two sets of instructions here. One set is for if you're doing clear blue tiles. The other set is for if you're doing your hooping and you're going to quilt after you're done. We're going to follow that second step. So we're going to pretend that we're not doing clear blue tiles and we're quilting after the quilt is finished. So for those, it recommends that we use a heavy mesh stabilizer. I highly recommend the ones we sell here at Kimberbell. Their quality is awesome. And so now that that is hooped, we'll get started. Okay, so the first steps that we are going to do is we're going to place tack marks so that we know where to hoop the other half of our block and make sure that the design is all centered in our hoops with the double hooping. So I'll stitch that out now. So now that I have those placement lines, what we're going to do is we're going to follow the instructions closely. We're going to fold that background fabric in half lengthwise. So as you can see, lengthwise. And as another thing I want to point out is that I used fusible backing on the back of my fabric. That's so important, especially for your white fabrics, just so you're not showing any thread that could get between your stabilizer and your fabric, or any stitch lines that you don't want to have that are happening underneath. So when I am double hooping and I am placing fabric, I like to think about the overall piece and how it's going to be stitched out. So if I'm looking at my fabric, the instructions say to fold it lengthwise, but you're going to fold your right sides together lengthwise like this. And if you starched your fabric, it should show a good line. Another thing you can do is you can use a water soluble or a heat pen to mark your lines just so you can see where it's going to go. I forgot mine today, so we're just going to go with the crease marks that we're going to be using. but you can see that very distinctly there. So I've got my lengthwise fold. The next fold we're going to do is we're going to do a 1-inch fold widthwise. So I'm just using the hatch marks on my cutting board to get that 1-inch length. So I'm just going to line that up, make sure it's nice and straight, perpendicular to that vertical line I just folded. And just fold it along those hatch marks. Okay, that's just going to allow enough clearance for when you tack down your fabric for it to go around and you to have enough fabric for it to catch. That's what that fold is for. I'm going to refold that and I'm going to place it down onto my hoop. So I'm going to line this vertical line with that center hatch mark, and I'm going to put that 1-inch fold along the horizontal line that I stitched down. Then I'm going to fold it over like that, and we should be properly placed at that point. So I'm going to fold it down. Here we are. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to tape it on these two edges before I stitch anything down. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stitch a basting stitch. That's just going to keep my fabric adhered to the hoop while we're designing. We will remove this stitch later, but I'm going to do it in a very visible color. If you're worried about that, you can definitely do it in a lighter color, but for camera's sake, it makes more sense to do it a little bit darker. Another thing you can do if you don't like these crease marks is you can iron, if you have a little mini iron in the hoop, just to get rid of them. I'm going to iron at the end, and I'm pretty confident that my design is flat and I'm not going to have any issues with puckering, so I am just going to leave it today for tutorial's sake. So that basting stitches down, you'll notice the machine only passed over once, so it's not double tacked and it'll be easy to pull out later. My next step, I'm going to stitch the stamp placement line. But really quick, I removed this from the hoop just so we can process a little bit of how we oriented this fabric, right? So we're going to have the bottom half of our design and the top half of our design. So this is how it should look. Alright, I've got my stamp placement line. I'm going to place my stamp fabric, which I pre-prepared for the tutorial. Just make sure it's covering that line as evenly as possible on all sides. I'm going to tape it down. And if you can, try to prepare even your colorful fabrics with fusible backing. It just adds that extra durability to your design, makes everything play nice and pucker less, so that when you go back and you do your quilting, you're not having thin fabrics that aren't playing as nice. It's all very form-fitting. It has a lot of structure to it. Okay, and you'll notice I haven't changed out my color yet. As I mentioned before, be watching those thread changes as you're going through your instructions. The reason why is because we're going to have a satin stitch in the correct color go across the entire design. So these stitch lines that I'm stitching right now are not going to be visible in the final product. You'll notice that the machine went over that design twice. That's a good way to keep track of where you're at. If you're doing a placement line, it'll go over once. If you're doing a tack down line, where that's going to be permanent. You're leaving that fabric, you're not removing anything. That's going to go over twice. So this fabric should be stuck pretty good onto my background fabric and my stabilizer, which will make it a lot easier to trim and will keep my final design on the block really pretty. So I'm just peeling the tape now. We're going to trim around the edges. Now everybody has different style with trimming. Upstairs in the test, when I was a tester, we all kind of had our different scissors we liked and different approaches. I personally really like to use these curved scissors, and Kimberbell is releasing a new pair that is a very cute teal color. And I was messing with the prototypes with Katie the other day, and they snap so final and beautiful. I'm so excited to use them. I can't wait for them to come out. But we're going to be using these today. When I'm doing straight cuts over large distances, these are the ones I turn to. And remember, as I said before, we're going to have a satin stitch that is going to go over this line. But with satin stitches, it doesn't matter so much that your fabric's even, it's not a raw edge applique, but I really like to get as close to that stitch line as possible, just so you don't have any edges snagging in between your stitches. Another thing I do is I like to kind of pull the fabric as I'm cutting away from my scissors. I think it helps my scissors out, helps me get closer, and just kind of applies the right tension. Just make sure as you're pulling, you're not hurting the tension inside your hoop, that you're kind of anchoring your hand and then just pulling what's being cut. Your scissors can also kind of anchor that stabilizer down too. So this is good to go. We're going to do a new placement line over the top of this for the inner designs of this stamp. These are also not going to be visible in the final product. Okay, I'm going to remove my hoop. You can see those lines there. Now, if you're running low on fusible backing, I know I've stressed this, and you're kind of deciding which ones you want to apply fusible backing to and which ones you want to kind of cheat on, this is one I would definitely not skip. That pink fabric can be pretty see-through. The rest you might be able to skim by. I'm just going to tape that fabric, fully covering the green fabric underneath. All right, I'm going to remove the hoop, remove my tape. And as you can see, this can kind of be a little awkward to trim because you don't have as much wiggle room. I kind of like to go with my scissors in between and just cut the fabric so that I have a little bit more space to trim things down and move my material around the design as I'm cutting. So I kind of freed all that center area that's really tacked down tight. And again, this is going to be a satin stitch that's going over top, so I'm just trimming really close to that edge. I'm just being a little perfectionist here, Trimming those really close. You can probably get away with this length. Just brushing off some of that excess fuzz. Place my hoop. Make sure I'm not sewing over that length of fabric. And I'm going to do, latch my machine. Here's my third placement lines. Now I'm going to place my red fabric over those placement lines. I love how this cinnamon bear color just pops. It's a beautiful red color. And it's kind of fun because we're stitching the same design from the needle minder. So if you haven't gotten one of these, I love the quality of these needle minders we've come out with for Pumpkins and Potions and for Quilty Little Christmas. It's a really good size, so it's just easier to find when you're hand sewing and to be able to catch your needles on. Okay, on this one, I'm not going to stress as much about freeing my fabric from the stabilizer like I did the last one. I'm just going to go straight for it. I've got enough wiggle room. And just be watching for that underlying applique, that you're not clipping your pink fabric with your scissors. Okay, last placement lines of the day for this half of the design. Place that final piece down. Move the tape and trim that last piece. Everything else from this point on is going to be thread work. Okay, we're going to move into our satin stitches. So our thread color is going to start to be important. Our next thread color that we're going to do is Pink Lemonade, just to cover these lines here. And remember to always clip from the top and then pull your thread through. If you pull your thread from the top, you can hurt the tensioning of your machine. All right, we're going to start to see those satin stitches come out. I love how bold they are in this design. It's really pretty. So we're just going to follow the instructions, changing threads as we go. Okay, now that I've stitched my beautiful satin stitches, look how cute they match. I am going to do my tick marks. I'm just going to leave the green that I was using before because we need them to be in a visible thread color. So I'm going to stitch those really quick so we can see them. Okay, so these registration marks are going to help us place the block as we do the second half. I'm going to remove the tape from my project real quick. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove these basting stitches, And they should come pretty smoothly because it's just one stitch over the top. And I like to use my seam ripper and just kind of peel it up. It's a lot easier from my perspective to remove these basting stitches with your project still hooped. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm approaching that first registration mark. I'm just going to make sure I don't accidentally remove that along with my basting stitch. Go around it. Go around this second one. Okay, and I'm just going to peel up that thread. Notice it goes pretty quick. Okay, now that I've peeled all that up, you'll notice you might be able to see on camera I've got little holes from where that basting stitch is. If you apply a little bit of water and iron it over, those will disappear pretty quick. We're going to remove our project from the hoop. This is always scary for me. And now that we've removed it, we are going to trim the stabilizer around the fabric. Okay, so I've trimmed around those edges. I'm going to hoop my stabilizer into my hoop quick. Now that I've got my stabilizer hooped, I'm going to start with part B. And I'm going to stitch the tick marks that I will attach this design to. And we want to stitch those in a visible color. Okay, so now that I've got those registration marks sewn, my next step is to grab these tacks here, and I'm going to flip my hoop to the back, and I am going to put my tack in the corner of that registration mark, just like so. And you should kind of already have a hole punched from your needle of your machine. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tape that tack down so it doesn't wiggle. Then I'm going to flip it back over. You can see I've got my ends of my needle sticking out. And my next step is I'm going to look and I'm going to just double check, right? So as I place this in, the top half of my design where it says have yourself a quilty little Christmas is going to be right here. So I like to kind of orient myself by looking at the block. This is going to be on this half of the fabric. So I'm just going to line up this corner of this registration mark up with my needle again, so that the needle punctures through here. So now that I've got that lined up, I'm going to tape it down really good so we don't get any puckering or anything like that. And then also, once you get going, do not forget to remove your thumbtacks, just so they're out of your way. You don't want to accidentally jab yourself or maybe even get it caught in your machine. So I'm going to remove those thumbtacks really quick. So now that I've removed those and I've taped this down, we're going to have a basting stitch that's going to go over the top and adhere the fabric down as we design. I would definitely tape it down so that doesn't pucker anywhere. Really good. And then it's going to stitch out your design. Have yourself a quilty little Christmas. The entire theme of all of the projects right here on this block. And in the center, you'll see there is a garland and there is a heart in the center. Make sure that if you are using a custom button, you skip that step of filling in the heart and you just sew the button where you need it to be placed. If you don't have a custom button, we also offered an option so that you can do a fill of a heart right there. So thank you for joining me today to go over the double hooping of this project. I'm really excited to see the projects that come forward on Bellas and Fellas. If you like this tutorial, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.